Glad to be at Deploy. I'm Jake Laverne, Senior Director of Product Management at DigitalOcean, and I'm really excited to be telling you about the App Platform, one of our newest offerings that helps you get your apps to market faster, really lets you focus in on your product, your code, your app, and not have to spend much time on other things. Let's take a step back and look at DigitalOcean as a whole. We're really founded with the notion of simplifying the cloud. Entrepreneurs, startups, small and medium businesses, individual developers can come to DigitalOcean to build amazing apps and change the world. That's been our premise since the beginning. In fact, if we look all the way back at Droplets, since the earliest days, Droplets have been built on simplicity. They're simple to start up. You can spin them up in just a few seconds. All the storage you need is included with the Droplet. You don't need to manage file systems. And while you do need to manage your infrastructure, you can deploy anything you want. We give you thousands of tutorials that help you do that. Super flexible and definitely simple as far as spinning up virtual machines go. But the App Platform takes it a step further. We really wanted to democratize the cloud, make it easier for everyone around the world, more accessible, to be able to use cloud to build out your vision without having to spend as much time on the core infrastructure. What is App Platform? App Platform is a platform as a service, also called a PaaS. That makes it a lot simpler and faster to build, deploy, and scale your applications. It's a fully managed solution, so you can build apps and not infrastructure. So as long as you're building an app that fits within the App Platform framework, we make it much, much simpler and easier to get started and build production quality apps. Let's take a look at what's included with the App Platform. So with App Platform, you can deploy as many apps as you want, and each app is on one of 3 tiers of service. All tiers of service, including the starter tier, come with a global CDN, which is a content distribution network, makes it easy for all of the assets of your site or application to be available at high performance worldwide, so that all of your users can have a great experience using your site assets. We use SSL and TLS so that by default, from the moment that you deploy your application or site, you're going to see that HTTPS URL. In addition, from a security perspective, we include DDoS protection and prevention. And then along with that, we have a lot of capabilities across the board. So all apps can have custom domains, as well as continuous deployment from Git sources. So we make it easy to get your code into production with just the push of a button. Moving up to the basic tier, this is really for developing dynamic backend applications. So if you've got any workload that needs to run in a containerized fashion, we can create those containers for you and deploy them as services, workers, or jobs. We'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. But in general, if you need to build out a backend, a service, any sort of API, the basic tier is going to give you all the capabilities of the starter tier, plus the ability to run those containerized workloads, more bandwidth per hour metrics from an insights perspective, and the ability to size up those containers. So you can really develop and prototype just about any type of application that you need, including both static assets and containerized workloads. And then the Pro tier is perfect for when your application is growing and really needs to scale and be highly available, right? So get all the capabilities of Starter and Basic, except your components can be scaled out as well as scaled up. And so this means that you can have redundant instances of your application's components running. In addition, we have the option for dedicated CPU on the Pro plan, and you get per minute metrics in your insights and reporting. So just contrasting a little bit, how were apps built on DigitalOcean prior to App Platform? Well, it was do-it-yourself, right? I mean, we gave you all the core components of cloud that you needed, all the infrastructure that you needed, like droplets, firewalls, metrics and monitoring, networking, databases, and you would pull these together to make the infrastructure that you needed, and then it was up to you to create the mechanisms for deploying your code and your app into that infrastructure. So very do-it-yourself. And of course, today you can still use DigitalOcean from a do-it-yourself perspective. But managing infrastructure is a lot of work. We realize that for certain teams, small focused teams, application development teams, managing infrastructure may not be a core competency. It's more of a means to an end. You're really trying to serve your customers, focus on your product, focus on your business, and you may not want to spend valuable time managing infrastructure that could instead be spent focused on your app and your business. We heard this loud and clear from DigitalOcean customers. It's one of the most requested features. For example, we heard, I want to stick with DO, yet want to get away from managing infrastructure myself. If I could just get Node.js, a Go component, a database component, this would make a whole application much easier to run. And from one early adopter of the app platform, I've been waiting for this for years from DO. And now with that platform, DigitalOcean offers the best of both worlds. You still have access to all of the cloud infrastructure that you might need. You have the app platform, which will take care of managing infrastructure for you if you're building a certain class of applications, or you can combine the two, and we'll take a look at a couple of examples of what that might mean. Drilling in a bit to the app platform, let's talk about the pieces that you manage for an app, right? So you're no longer managing infrastructure resources. Instead, you're managing the components of your application. And what might those components be? Your application can have a static site component or multiple static site components. These could be the front end of your application. Good example would be a React or a Vue.js static site, or maybe even a static blog generated by something like Gatsby or Hugo, right? That's one component of your application. Another component of your application are the services that run in the back end to serve up your API or your server-side rendered content. So examples here would be like a Python Django backend or a PHP backend. And so the app platform lets you create service components within your application that can be scaled up or out for handling that type of traffic to those containerized workloads. Background workers are perfect for asynchronous work that needs to happen continually in the background. So examples would be like processing a bunch of images or video, processing email inboxes. All that can be handled by background workers. Again, containerized workloads that are kept continually running by the app platform for your application. Jobs let you set up one-time events, so things that don't need to be done on a continual basis, but might need to be done in response to a trigger. So for example, post-deployment, you might have a job that runs database migrations, schema migrations, so something that keeps your database structure up to date as you deploy each of your new code changes. And then finally, manage databases. The app platform allows you to manage simple development databases as a component of your application, or it lets you connect in more powerful DigitalOcean managed databases as part of your application. All of these components are just connected directly to your code updates, right? So each component within an app platform application, static site, services, background workers, jobs, all of those are driven directly off of Git repository. And as you make updates to the code in that Git repository, those updates create automatic deployments that build that code base and then roll out that code as new containers for your application. And maybe the last point, the app platform is available via UI, command line, or API. So we make it really easy for you to create and manage your apps through 3 different mechanisms. We have a rich user interface that we're going to take a look at here in a few minutes in the demo. That lets you create apps, manage, update apps, create new components of your application, scale them out with one click, super simple. But under the covers, there's also a complete app specification that lets you use configuration files if you prefer to define all the aspects of your app, including custom domains, all the details of your different components, all the connections directly to your code base. That can be done through configuration if you prefer. And then that configuration can be pushed to the app platform either through a command line, the doctl command line, or through standard DigitalOcean public APIs. This is a really nice set of choices because it means that you can manage individual apps through the UI, or if you have many applications that you need to manage and maintain, you can do it more programmatically. So what can you build with the app platform? The app platform is really for building any web accessible application, site, or service. So you can build out a web app, maybe a traditional web app like a PHP web app or a Node.js web app. You can build out static sites. So if you have a static blog, like a Hugo or Gatsby generated blog, or if you have a static single page application like React or a Vue.js or Next.js app, you can build those with that platform. Or you can build out services or APIs. Let's say you're trying to create an API or a backend service that's going to be accessed by multiple clients. You can build that out on the app platform. Any sort of web accessible application or service can be built with the app platform. So let's take a look at a few examples. Right? So one would be a simple high performance static site. And we talk about static sites. We don't necessarily mean that the user interface of this site is static. These can be really rich dynamic applications, especially if you're using frameworks like Vue.js, for example. We just mean a static site is made up of static assets, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, maybe some images, icons, for example, but no running containerized workloads, right? No backend dynamic components. And so a static site on the app platform is simple. You create an app with a single component, which is that static site component, and you're going to get that global CDN with high performance and security from day one just by building an app through the app platform and creating that single static site component. So this is a great way to deploy your statically generated blogs, or to deploy rich single-page applications that have just a client front end. Similarly, you can create a new application in the app platform and just define a service component. Service component is going to be running backend, so like a Python Django or a Node.js backend. And the app platform will automatically build containerized versions of that backend when you point it to your code base. And then it will run those containers for you. And most importantly, it'll make it dead simple for you to scale those containers up. So if you need more memory or CPU to run those, you can do that. Or out, right? If you need to run 2 or 4 or 10 instances of a given service, you just push a button and we're going to give you that high availability and that scale. But the really nice thing about App Platform is it's completely flexible. You can combine these components in any way to make a full application. So your app could have a high performance static front end, right? Maybe you've got a React front end, but your backend API is a Node.js API. So you can put both of those components within the same application. You can define the scaling independently for that backend Node.js API service. And then you can add in background workers. We were talking about these earlier for asynchronous processing, right? So if you have a set of Python background workers that you need to run to do ongoing tasks in the background, like processing images or videos or other asynchronous work, you can set those up. App Platform will manage those also within the same application. And then manage databases for persistence. Right? We make it super simple for you to either create a development database directly within your application or to connect your application to an already existing DigitalOcean managed database for production usage. And then taking it one step further, since you have the full power of the DigitalOcean cloud, you can have your app platform app running, but also run individual cloud products on DigitalOcean as well. So for example, maybe your app needs to store large media, big videos, high resolution photos that need to be served up to your users. So you can use Spaces object storage for those large media, connect Spaces to your application just through the API and environment variables. And then maybe you need even more. DigitalOcean offers hundreds of solutions in our marketplace that can be started with just one click and let you do a wide range of things. So for example, if your application needs a GraphQL backend running on Postgres, no problem. We have the Hasura one click within the marketplace for that. If you need advanced monitoring, you might use the Grafana one click inside the marketplace. And maybe you need an entire pre-built discussion forum, right? You don't want to go off and build custom discussion forum software. Well, we've got Discourse in the marketplace for that, and you can just run a Discourse instance in one click and tie that together through the UI of your application. So now, with all that background, let's just take a moment and look at a demo, go through all the features and capabilities of the app platform. Great, let's take a look at a demonstration. We're going to deploy an app using the app platform. And just to get a sense of what we're going to deploy, here's a screenshot of what our final application is going to look like. We're going to build out an RSS reader. I kind of miss Google Reader. I'm happy to get some unfiltered news, so we can deploy the SAMI RSS reader. And this is available on DO Community GitHub. So thanks to Chris and Mason, we've got the RSS Reader API. So this is our backend Python Django application, and that service will provide the API for RSS Reader. And then the front end is React single page app. It's just a static site that we'll deploy. So we'll be able to deploy both of those components as part of a single app platform application. So let's get started. We're going to come to the app platform. We're going to launch our app. And we're connected up to GitHub. So I'm just choosing a repository. If I wanted to, actually, I could deploy a demo app. The app platform has over a dozen demo applications, lots of different languages and frameworks. So you could deploy one of those, but we've got one. So we're going to go ahead and deploy the API first. So here we are, choose the RSS Reader API, go through, and I can name this application. So the overall application, let's just call it RSS. I can choose my region. I can pick a branch. So if that GitHub repo had multiple branches, I can choose one to deploy. And I can do this really cool thing. I check this box, and every time I make an update to this branch, like merge some code into this branch, it's going to automatically deploy those changes for me. All right, go through in a few seconds. It detects that this is a Python application. It knows that it's a web service, so we're going to have it always running and internet accessible. I can come through. There are a bunch of optional configurations I can do. We'll do that in a minute, but this app needs a database. And so I could choose an existing DigitalOcean managed database that I've got running, easy enough. Or in this case, I'm going to create a development database as part of my application. Really easy to get started. And now let me come through and do some of those configurations that I was just talking about. So one of the biggest ones are environment variables. I know I've got to set some for this Python app. One is the debug environment variable, standard Django end variable. I'm going to set this to false so that we're running not in debug mode. And then the other thing I have to set up is Django allowed hosts. And in this case, this is going to be the URL of my application, but I don't know that yet. But luckily, App Platform provides some substitution variables that I can use here, like app domain. that's going to automatically fill in with whatever the domain is for my app. That's going to come in handy in the future just a little bit when I add in a custom domain. And then the last one specific to my application here is the app platform route. And so in this case, we'll use /API, and that's that's the path that we're going to use for this API service. I could also configure a custom build command if there are additional steps that I need the app platform to do during build. But if not, it's just going to automatically build based on the fact that it detected a Python Django application. I can also custom tailor the run command, and I can put as many commands as I want here, just like I would at a terminal shell or a bash shell. In this case, I just need to add one extra parameter. If needed, I could also change the port. By default, we listen on 8080, or a platform expects that your app will listen on 8080, but whatever port your app is listening on, you can configure it here. But for now, this looks good to go. We're tier of service. In this case, we'll use the basic tier because we're going to build it out as a just one instance for now. When we need to scale later on, we can upgrade. Go ahead and launch app. And it's going to create my application for me. I get brought to the dashboard, which will populate with some details in a little bit. So the build process has kicked off. There's actually one thing I need to do, and I can make changes even while builds are in progress. I need to come into this component and set the route. I don't really want my API running on slash. I instead want it listening on /API. So we'll do that update. It really doesn't waste any time. The app platform realizes that I just made a change. It'll cancel that build in progress, and it'll start a new build for us. We can look at the details of this build as it's running. So I get access to the build logs, which lets me see everything that's happening behind the scenes. I mean, the app platform has got a whole build pipeline that is running for us. We really don't have to worry about any of it. In this case, it's using build packs, open source build packs, to automatically configure a container for me, and that container is what's going to run to power my the service component of my application. We'll just wait a minute and let that finish up. Great, it looks like that build is done. The app has deployed successfully. Now there are a couple of things that we need to do for this app to get it running before we can access it. We can use a neat feature of the app platform called the console. So console is going to connect us directly to a running container for any of our app services. And I can run commands here. Perfect for doing things like database migrations. So in this case, we've got to set up all the tables in our development database. With the Django application, we can just do that by running manage.py. There are a bunch of commands. We'll do Python manage migrate, and this is what applies database migrations to my application. It's probably all set. Let's take a look by using the DB shell, which is a cool command. It's going to automatically connect me directly to my database. Again, because this is running in the container for the service I just deployed, it's got all the right setup, all the right environment variables configured. My database connection string, which was set up automatically for me by the app platform. And so here I am connected to my apps database. I can list out the databases that are in here. This is just like a standard pSQL prompt. I can connect to one of the databases. I can take a look at the tables, right? And I see that everything's been created successfully when I ran that migration. Let's go ahead and also create a super user. So we'll use Python manage again. Whoops. Python manage. This time we'll do create super user. This is again for the Django application. I'm going to set up a user that I can log in with. Great. I think we're all set here using the console. I mean, a thing to keep in mind, right, is that these are containerized services, applications under the covers. So I can't do things that I expect to happen permanently on the container, right? I mean, this container will get restarted every time I redeploy, so I shouldn't do anything permanent to the file system. And I really can't hurt anything either. If the container comes down, App Platform will automatically restart it for me. But that's why I'm using a database in this instance for persistent storage. All right, let's go ahead and visit the application and go to the admin path. Can log in with that super user I just created. And there we are. I mean, it's not pretty, but I've got the application. I can access it, right? This is my my API and the standard Django admin interface for that API. Great. Let's keep rolling though. Come back to the app platform. We can see actually in the logs all the activity, right? I mean, these are the runtime logs of my API. So I can see that all in one place here, right? I can console in, I can see the logs. But what we're going to do now is try and get a much nicer user interface deployed. So we're going to do that by using that React front end that I was talking about. So to do that, we're going to come over to components. One really nice thing about the app platform is that your app can have a bunch of components, as many services and databases as you want. We can also add in workers. So if there's asynchronous background work that we need to do, like I was talking about, processing images or building a text index, we can do that with one or more background workers. And in this case, static site. So I'm going to be able to deploy a set of static assets. So here it'll be a React single page app, and that'll be deployed along with my application now. So we'll use the RSS reader front end repository. We'll name this component front end. I think that'll be just fine. We'll use the master branch. Again, any updates I make here to that code repository will get auto deployed. We'll see that in a minute. All right, Node. It auto detected that it's a Node generated app and it's a static site, which is perfect. No, I don't love front end as my route. I actually want the default route to map to this UI. And there's actually one more database, one more environment variable I need to add. And in this case, it's one I created called React App API URL. And that is just so that the front end knows where to reach that Python Django API that I created for the back end. Now I could just type out the full URL for my backend API, especially as I use a custom domain later on. So we're going to use another example of a substitution variable that the app platform supports. I can reference any service I want by name. So in this case, my RSS service, and I can say I want the public URL for that. Great, that's going to feed all the way through to my environment variables. I think I'm all set. I'll hit next. This doesn't add anything to the cost of my app because it's a static site. We'll go ahead and launch that. Great. Looks like that deployment was successful, and now we should have a front end for our RSS reader app. So let's go ahead and open it up. We can log in again with that same super user. Here we are in our reader application. Let's subscribe to a feed so we can start to see some articles coming in. So we'll subscribe to the DigitalOcean blog, and there we go. Amazing. We can see that reader app working. We've got the the front end connecting to the back end. Awesome. But let's go one step further and see what happens when we make a code change. Maybe instead of Sammy Reader, we want this to say Jake's Sammy Reader. So we'll go ahead over to our code, and let's actually make a change to the front end. Go into the source, the components, the header, and just like we were talking about, instead of saying Sammy Reader, let's say Jake Sammy Reader. Now, normally I wouldn't do an edit, in GitHub directly against master, but for this demo, I think it's fine. Commit those changes. Right, so it's like committing and merging those changes directly into my repo, and then back over here in the app platform, we can see that that's triggered a new build. All right, that deploy was successful. So we should see our code change in effect now. Go ahead and take a look at our application, and now it's Jake's Sammy Reader. So as we make underlying code changes, the live application can stay up to date. All right, let's go ahead and scale this application up. Let's imagine that we're getting so much traffic that we need more availability. We'll go in this case to our RSS component, so the backend service, our API, and we're just going to scale it. And scaling it is as easy as saying, you know what, I need a professional tier plan, which is going to get me more memory, and I also need multiple instances. Maybe I need two containers for my API running. I save that, and it's going to go ahead and just rebuild and redeploy. And the nice thing is that this means that my API will also be highly available. So instead of just relying on one container, I'll have two running at any given time. Even while this deployment is happening, one of the nice things is that the application is always up and running at any point in time, right? So I come over here and I can see that my app is up. I can even subscribe to other feeds. So in this case, let's look at the NASA education news feed and subscribe to that. The app itself, like we just saw, fully functional, even while the scale up deployment and scale out deployment is happening. Great, that deployment was successful, and now we're scaled up and scaled out. One of the nice ways we can know that is by looking at our insights. So for all of the components of our application, I can get insights and metrics. Let's zoom in the last hour. We had for the RSS component just RSS 0, so one container, 3%, 2%. But then when we performed that scale out, we ended up with two containers, RSS 0 and RSS 1, both in action. I can also take a look at at my database metrics right here from the app platform, so I don't have to leave that. I can zoom in here and see details of CPU usage, load average, memory usage, disk usage, all the metrics for my database. And of course, if I was scaling up my application for traffic, I would also scale up my database, which I could do right here. I could upgrade to a managed database and therefore get the capacity and redundancy I need from a fully managed database. We won't do that right now, but we will look at maybe just one more thing, and that's support for custom domains. So within settings for my application, I can add a domain. We've got an included domain, but I'm going to go ahead and add my own. And the easiest way to do this is to register and then domain separately, configure it to point to DigitalOcean name server. So I've already done that. I need the CNAME alias, which I can copy right from here. Tell the app platform that deploy.jail.dev is going to point to here. We'll just come here and create the CNAME record. We'll do it for deploy.sharktail.dev, and we're going to have that go to be an alias of the name that I copied from the app platform. We can set a different time to live, maybe a little shorter if we want. Go ahead and create the record. Perfect. And when we go back to the app platform, great, the deployment succeeded after that domain name change. So I added deploy.sharktail.dev in, and now when I access that URL, I can see that I'm able to get to the SAMI RSS reader. Great. Let's look at one last, the app platform, which is the ability to deploy and manage your applications programmatically or through the command line. So if we come to the settings page of any app, we can see the app spec. So underlying every app that you build on the app platform is the specification or configuration file that defines all of the components that make up that application, the databases, the domains, sort of spells out all the details of your application. And so if we wanted to, we could save this spec from this app that we just created. We can use it as a basis for creating a new version of that application. So let's come over to the command line, take a look at that file that we just downloaded. We see all the definitions. Now the domains, let's get rid of this custom domain because we're making a copy of this application. And so we'll clean that up, and everything else here looks pretty good. So let's just change the name of the app. Instead of RSS, it'll be RSS-2. And we can save that file. And now we can use the doctl command line tool using the app command. And let's use app create. And app create is going to let us create a new app from a spec. And so if we want to, we can just say app create spec rss.yaml, the one we just downloaded and edited. And what this is going to do is it's going to post this spec to the app platform API, which is going to create a new app. And if we could come back and take a look at our apps, we'll see that that second app is now in the process of being built and deployed. Great, that deployed successfully. And now if we just give it a refresh, that database health should be updated in a second. Everything looks good. And we can visit this app and see that Jake SAMI Reader is up and running again in a second instance. This is perfect if you wanted to create a staging or development copy of your application. And so just sort of in recap, with the app platform, we can deploy applications. They can be rich applications made up of multiple components, multiple services, static sites. We can bring them from basic operation to being fully scaled out. And if we need to, we can easily use command line tools or the API directly to programmatically create multiple instances of sites or whole new sites as needed. So it's really something that's simple but powerful, great for deploying your real-world applications. Great. We just saw the app platform in action. Now I just want to give a little recap. So the app platform offers a fully managed solution. You can build, manage, and scale apps quickly, and we manage the servers, the operating systems, the runtimes, security, and all the other dependencies for you. And what this lets you do is really focus on your apps and your business as opposed to infrastructure. It's a nice way to take your time and attention and pour it towards what's most valuable to you and your project and your business. App Platform really lets you maximize developer productivity yourself or your teams by deploying code directly from GitHub repos in a wide variety of languages that you love. And you can run that code with little to no customization of infrastructure, right? We take care of it for you. We take your Go service, your PHP, your Ruby, your Python service, we package it up, build it, and deploy it for you on infrastructure. You don't even have to think about droplets or servers. We take your static assets, your Vue.js or React front end, and we deploy that for you directly to a rich global CDN fronted infrastructure. So that gets you the performance and scale that you're looking for there. It's just really nice to be able to spend your time really thinking more about your users than thinking about what's going to take to run your application. You can scale those apps without scaling costs. This is another really nice thing about the App Platform PaaS as opposed to other PaaS offerings, right? So since the App Platform runs on DigitalOcean infrastructure, costs are low even when you scale. And as you saw, scaling up or out is as easy as clicking a button or running a single command, and any component of your application can now be resized. And the nice thing is that even while that resizing is happening, even while that scaling out or redeployment is happening, your apps are completely available. They never come down because behind the scenes, we're managing the container infrastructure for you so that there's always an available service or site even as those deployments are going on. All this happens without the massive ramp up in costs that you might experience elsewhere. Really, the sky's the limit to what you can do with that platform. And so I just strongly encourage you to get started, try something out, use one of our sample apps or deploy an application of your own, build out that amazing app, that thing that you're really passionate and excited about, and you can use the App Platform to change the world with your application. Here's just a little more information about how to get started on the App Platform today. I encourage you to dive in and make use of it. The App Platform is a fully managed PaaS solution. It empowers you to focus on your business so that you can build apps that really do change the world. Thank you so much.